What? You can leave that open, Ken, with nobody here. It's not going to matter. I'm going for a record. Oh, good evening. Good evening. Welcome to Wednesday Night at Grace. This is a University of Grace lesson tonight, and tonight's topic is abortion. And my name is Danny Carpenter. Thank you for tuning in and watching. Our topic, abortion, is a political topic. Our definition of it for our working purposes for this lesson is simply that abortion is the ending of the life of a fetus in the womb of its mother. It is such a hot political topic in some areas that it's worth pausing for a moment and asking the question, why? Why is abortion a political topic at all? It seems like it ought to be a religious topic, certainly a personal faith or personal belief topic, but it is deeply entrenched in politics, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, we are a democratic society, so we do get to vote and choose the things that matter to us, the things we want our politicians to vote on. So that's why there's a segment of people in America that want abortion to be available and funded by the government. Number two, however, this topic, the fact that this is an issue of argument in our society, does indicate to most of us religious leaders that we are drifting from our founding fathers' concept of biblical values. The idea of carte blanche abortion, of abortion being legal at any time during 9 months, would have been horrendous to not just our founding fathers, pretty much to any civilized society as far back as you can trace it. So we are drifting from our founding fathers' political values. And the third thing I put on the screen is that our parties are very polarized. They don't gain anything from compromising with each other, and so for or against suit their goals. It would not behoove either party to compromise and find some reasonable rationale and limit the number and come back to a certain point in the stage of growth in the womb. It is easier for them to just stay polarized and say you're for or you're against, you're pro or you're anti. So our real debate is not about politics, because we really can't control that except by casting a vote when we're given an opportunity, and that's almost unheard of on topics as deeply entrenched as this one is. So our focus is just on the Bible. What does the Bible say about abortion, if anything? So we'll turn to Exodus, the 21st chapter, and just start with these verses. When men shall strive together, that should be strive, that's a typo. When men shall strive together and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there is no harm, the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. Verse 23 continues, but if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life. So notice again, verse 22, if a pregnant woman is struck, it doesn't say intentionally or accidentally. It just says if two men are striving and a pregnant woman is struck so that her children are prematurely forced out, but the children are fine, everything seems to be okay, the person who struck her shall still be fined according to what her husband imposes and the judges accept. And then the conclusion, however, if one of those children is harmed, or the mother, then they reverted to Mosaic law, which was eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for life. So this is this particular passage is not about intentional abortion. We know that. But what it does tell us is how God felt about the value of a child in the womb. So even though the verse is not about intentional or deliberate abortion, The verse is there to show us how God valued life in the womb, how he instructed Moses to care for the life in the womb of the mother, so much so that even if a man accidentally struck her, caused the premature birth and the premature death of that child, that man's life would also be taken from him. So under Mosaic law, what that tells us is the child in the womb had the same right to life and safety as someone already born. And that's a very important part of our religious debates about abortion today. Why do we refer to the baby in the womb and sometimes say we believe in the sanctity of life? For a couple of reasons that I put on the screen. One, man is not an elevated animal. With all apologies to the evolutionist crowd, I'm just old enough to have been raised in probably the first generation that, in fact, the first generation that actually was taught in public schools of evolution. It was clearly taught as a theory. I can recall some of my teachers actually apologizing that they had to teach what they were about to teach, and then making sure that the students knew this is not fact, this is not science, this is not true knowledge, this is the theory of evolution. They did that in my youth. It's interesting because in my youth, you remember the pictures in my 8th grade science book, we had the stages of man's progression through all the from the slug to the first little thing on 2 legs, and then to the thing that looked like monkeys, and then, man, Cro-Magnon, and so on and so forth. And I wish I had one of those 8th grade books, because since my 8th grade, one of those drawn sketches of man somewhere in the progress of his growth, one of those has been completely removed, including the name and the description of his of the era in which he was developing, because that photo or that picture of him and that time period was completely developed based on a piece of a bone. And in process of time, with modern dating methods and better machinery and equipment for the study of science, it was eventually proven that that piece of bone, on which they had based an entire spectrum of man's development, that entire piece of bone was just the tooth of a pig, an extinct pig, not a tooth or a bone of a man, and certainly not enough to base an entire spectrum of man's developmental stages on. So with apologies to evolutionists, and God bless you, I know there's a lot of room for us to believe that animals can change as climates change and so on and so forth. But there's a uniqueness about man. It's the only creature that God says God made in the image and likeness of God. We will grant that in the creative description of Genesis, God even says, let the earth bring forth every living creature. So we will give you that maybe God created this world in such a unique way that the world itself has the seed of life, and the world can bring forth living plants and perhaps living creatures. But that's not the story of man, and he didn't evolve from those animals. The story of creation clearly distinguishes between his creation and animals' creation, and says that God created man in God's own image and his likeness. Jeremiah gives us this verse from quoting God, before I formed you in the belly, I knew you, and before you came out of the womb, I sanctified you. And we understand that was a statement made to Jeremiah from God. And so, you could argue the finer point of, well, that's just Jeremiah. It is foolish to think one person out of all the people that God's ever had in the world, 7 billion now, and no telling how many cumulative total of all this time, it would be silly to say, well, out of all these people, there was one man that God knew while he was in the womb and sanctified him in the womb. Everybody else just on your own somehow. We understand this verse is just God's description of what he thinks about the life in the womb. He forms us in the womb. David himself said, he was known in the womb before he was born. He was shapen in sin, born in iniquity, but God knew him. God ordained, God called. That's what Jeremiah is trying to tell us about God. God knows the child in the womb, and he knows what that child will be. And so God pays attention to the child. And especially back in Moses, the Mosaic law, the life of the child in the womb was considered of same value as the life of a man, so that if a man accidentally caused the death of that birth, the premature birth and death of the baby, his life would actually be paid in return. So that's pretty clear that God sanctifies life. One other verse in this context, and that's Proverbs 127:3, that tells us that children are a heritage from the Lord. Now just imagine that. We would say every child that's been born to you, if you have children, that child was God's gift to you. It was a heritage from God to you. And so we have to honestly and conscientiously ask ourselves, when did that happen? Did God only decide when that child was born and was laying in the lap of the mother, now that child is my heritage to you? Or was that God's gift from the very beginning of conception? And as that child grew and was formed, as the psalmist David said, you formed me, you shaped me in my mother's womb. And so we accept that life is sanctified, that God has put his favor and blessing on all human life. It's impossible to talk about abortion, even though our purpose has nothing to do with government other than ours is doing this, but it's impossible to talk about the subject these days without at least mentioning taxes and government. Government funds abortions in America, but it will not and does not fund adoptions. This is just a point I want to make. It's got not a lot to do with our lesson tonight, our biblical lesson, but it is worth noting that it may be that abortions are as abundant as they are because the government pays for them and it pays for no other alternative. Adoptions are not paid for by the government. If you want to adopt a child, you will have to pay out of pocket. And I'm very familiar with that process because I have a daughter who has adopted two. And I can tell you that it starts at $15,000 in fees and dues just to adopt a child. And so, so that comes out of your pocket, nowhere else. And it's also fair to say that a teenage girl, just to use an example, who became pregnant in high school might not want to have an abortion. She might rather have the child and give it up to adoption, but then her family would have to pay thousands of dollars to doctors and hospitals to give birth to the baby, and then still have to pay an adoption agency to take the child and put it out to a family. Whereas they can just say, well, go get an abortion, and an abortion will cost them less than $150 out of pocket. So it may be that the numbers of abortion are not fairly reflective of our morals, although we could say no. It may just be that it becomes an economic convenience because of the position that the government puts the prospective mother in. I'll give you a couple of numbers. In 2020, last year, there were 42.6 million abortions worldwide. The first 10 months of this year, I just pulled these numbers up a couple of days ago, so they're off already now, but not by much. Just to give a comparison and to look at the numbers, so far, with 2 months left in the year, there have been 35,750,000 abortions. There have been 3 million COVID deaths, 7 million deaths around the world from other communicable diseases. Communicable simply meaning like flu and other things that you can catch from somebody else. That does not include HIV. That has its own separate category, and I just didn't write it down. So that's 10 million people from communicable diseases, because COVID is certainly one. 35 million abortions so far, 10 million communicable diseases, deaths, 49 million total deaths so far, but remember, the 49 does not include the 35,750,000 abortions so far, because those who count the numbers, and these numbers came from Worldometer, those who count the numbers do not count abortions as deaths. They just count them as abortions. So if we included them as deaths, there would be 40, 50, 60, 70, 84,000 84,750,000 deaths so far, because there have been. It's just that we don't count abortions as deaths. But when I look at these numbers and at the enormity of their size, we are panicking a world and trying to panic a world over a communicable disease that is 99.9% survivable, less than 0.1%, less than 1% is like it's really like 0.3% or something of that number. But that's about the number of people who actually die from COVID. And so we're panicking the world and making sure everybody knows what a horrible crisis we have with the pandemic, even though last year and this year, 3,000 so far this year, 3 million so far this year, 2 million last year. So the number's up to 5 million. And if you combine the abortion deaths for that same period of time, you're looking at 35,750,000 plus 42 million. That's around 78 million deaths by abortion, 78 million versus 5 million deaths from COVID-19. And even that number, we now know the CDC is acknowledging finally that number is skewed dramatically, because that number is simply the number that is reported who have died from COVID-19. And that reported number is, by their concession, they allow hospitals to treat every death that has tested positive as a COVID death, even if the cause is from heart attack or from other comorbidities in the hospital. So the last number CDC themselves released, we did a run on 220,000 deaths from CDC, and we literally came down to 6% of 220,000 deaths were actually attributable only possible to COVID-19, which means out of a count of 220,000 deaths, only 13,000 of those could actually be said to be caused by COVID-19. So I'm just telling you that, not because this is a COVID-19 speech, but because this is, I want you to see how starkly contrasted these two numbers are. 35,750,000 dead infants in the womb versus 3 million COVID deaths. And of that 3 million, if we take the 220,000 as a model from CDC, only 6% of those would actually have died from COVID. So we have created a world situation over 3 million and possibly 6% of that only. And we have completely, you don't hear anybody talking about it. It's not going to be on any news story that 35 million babies so far have been aborted this year, 42.6 million last year. That's not going to be on anybody's radar. Let me tell you why I'm saying all that. And it's not to be lacking compassion about those who are fighting a life-changing event. It's just to make this statement. Abortion is mostly a form of birth control in America and in the world. There is absolutely no way 35,750,000 mothers' lives were in danger, and therefore they needed an abortion because their life was in danger. Nor was it 35,750,000 teenagers who just don't want their lives ruined because they're still in high school by a baby. This has become a free or very inexpensive way to just take care of getting pregnant, but not have to change our habits, our morality, or our lifestyle. Dr. Ben Carson said that essentially, I got a quote from him on the screen, but I'm going to abbreviate it just to make this point. Basically, when asked about, well, what about abortion for the life of the mother if we're trying to save the life of the mother? He essentially said that almost never happens. There might be 1 or 2 cases in millions of that, and if so, then we certainly save the life of the mother and abort the child, and that would be a unique and an understandable circumstance. But according to Dr. Ben Carson, when it comes to the case of the life of the mother, this is his quote, you have to look at the individual situation and recognize that that is largely a spurious argument, because we have advanced so much in medicine these days that that situation rarely occurs. Dr. Ben Carson would know that because he has operated on an abundant number of infants while they're still in the womb. And he will also tell you, and has done it so in many interviews, that the fetus in the womb can feel pain, and it is why they have to operate with technical machinery that is designed to be least invasive possible, and even in some cases offer some kind of anesthesia, because the fetus can sense pain after a certain number of weeks. So I mentioned this a minute ago, not wanting to ruin the life of a young girl or a lady with a baby. And I just have to ask, why would a birth of a child be tantamount to ruining the life of a girl or a mother? Because we view the birth of a child as the ruining of a life, we actually remove the stain of the status of the mother and her male counterpart. I'm not sure this is an argument that any of us want to get involved in. A baby, one of the former presidents actually said, I wouldn't want one of my daughter's life ruined because she got pregnant. And I was so disappointed that the leader of a nation would make that statement. I wouldn't want the life of one of my daughters ruined because she got pregnant. How about I wouldn't want one of my daughters to get pregnant? I wouldn't want one of my daughters to think that sex outside of marriage was okay. I wouldn't want one of my juvenile or high school daughters to just think it was okay to have sex. That would be such a great thing for any moral father to say, but his statement was, I just wouldn't want her life ruined because she got pregnant. I expect her to have sex, I guess, but I don't want her to get pregnant. I'd want her to have an abortion. And what a pitiful form. That's my opinion. Not to step on your favorite president if he is, but God bless you. But what a pitiful statement for a leader to make regarding that kind of moral issue, which doesn't just affect Christians, Muslims and Islam, Christianity and Judaism. All three religions have a very strong stands about abortion, and yet all three of them also have leniency toward a mother whose life's in danger in exceptional cases. And so for the leader of a country to just make a statement that to have a child would ruin her life is embarrassing. As a pastor, I can tell you I've known a number of people who did not expect to get pregnant, were not married when they got pregnant. I pastor some folks who gave birth to children that were not wanted, not expected, not from a husband, and yet they made the decision not to abort. And I can tell you that it's a delightful thing to watch the growth and the progress of people who just accept the circumstances, still have value for life. There's a beautiful little girl comes to this church almost every Sunday, and she's literally just postcard perfect, looks like a little doll, and she would not be here if her grandmother had decided abortion was the only way out many long years ago. But her grandmother said, I made a mistake. I'm not going to compound it by making a second mistake. I'm going to have this baby. I'm in high school. It's going to change my life, but I'm going to have this baby. And she did have that baby. I will tell you that our church stepped up. She wanted me to tell the whole church so people wouldn't just rumor or gossip about it. And so she came forward one Sunday so that we could just together make the announcement to the whole church. She wants you to know that she has made a bad choice and got pregnant, and she's going to start showing here shortly, and she's going to keep this baby and give birth to it and raise it. And then I said to the church, and you and I are going to help her raise it, and we're going to love her and love this child just like we would if she was our own, and that's what we're going to do. And we did. And so it's still a delightful thing for me to see that mother's life not ruined, absolutely not ruined. Went on to college, got her master's degree, has a professional position, and just in an excellent place in life. And nothing about that child ruined her life. In fact, that child might have changed her life and made her step up to a maturity that she would have been awfully slow developing. I chuckle sometimes when I get in discussions with mothers and fathers about, well, my daughter, I wouldn't want my daughter here. I wouldn't want her to be messed up by that. I wouldn't want her life to be ruined by this, that, and the other. And I chuckle sometimes because I think, well, what do you think is going to happen to your daughter? Well, what is she going to do? Is she going to go on to become president of the United States if she doesn't get an abortion, or is she just going to go on to live life like everybody else? Get a job, take care of a child, get married to a man someday who will have to accept her and accept a child. I don't know. I don't get that. I do marriages all the time where a child from either a previous marriage or a previous relationship, not married, has to be included. And in fact, in a couple of weeks, I'm doing a wedding where at the conclusion of that wedding here in Texas, I'm going to bring a child up. And the child and the new mom and dad, the new bride and groom, are going to join hands with the child, and we're going to pray together for that family being created. But it's not the perfect family picture, as we would say. It comes from choices made previously. And they're not ruined. They're going on and making something good come from something that was wrong. And that's what the Bible talks about. He gives us beauty for our ashes. That's his way of saying you can't bury the ashes in the backyard and hide sin and hide problems. But if you bring them to me, I'll take the ashes and I'll give you beauty back for what you bring to me. We have lost our concept of just turning our lives over to God, including all of our mistakes. And abortion doesn't let us save our life. Abortion just adds to the pattern of hiding our sin and staying away from God. And so I don't mean to be calloused and cold. I understand, a woman's fears and all those things. We'll talk about a few of them here before we go, but I want to get to the real problem that I perceive about abortion. Abortion is the evidence to me that we have forsaken biblical morality. I cannot blame the government because we have an abundance of abortion. I cannot blame the world governments because 42 million babies were aborted last year, and that's about the right number for every year. Every year, the number of abortions almost equals the total number of deaths in the world, but they're not counted. I think last year there were 49, year before last, 2019, I think, there were 49 million abortions and 52 million total deaths. I might be off by a million or two there, but that's about the way it comes out. And so those 49 million and 42 million last year, those are not included in that total death count. Otherwise, we'd be looking at some staggering numbers of deaths. But what it does tell me is that we have forsaken biblical morality. And I'm not going to blame the government for that. The failure is equally laid on the shoulders of church, of teachers, of parents, and the entertainment industry. I don't have a lot of respect for any part of the entertainment industry. I'm telling you, my wife and I are old enough, I guess, that we don't get caught up in stars and stardoms, and I don't know the names of actors and actresses, and I don't care, and I don't follow series, and I don't. We'll channel surf now and then when something really turns us off, we just get up and go do something else. Television is not something I occupy myself with, but I can tell you just over the last few years, my wife and I channel surfing, just trying to find something on a weekend that's amusing or entertaining when we got a couple of bored hours to do nothing. It's embarrassing to start watching a show and realize just how much your morality, your sense of morality is challenged by shows that are wildly popular in America. It is fundamentally routine anymore. It's just going to happen in any movie. You're going to see people having sex. Even if it's a PG one, maybe you're not going to see them naked, but you're going to know that they are. You're going to know they're going to the bedroom together. They're going to be making out. They just won't be exposed because you're going to see that. Anymore, it's like I'll be upstairs in my office sometimes, and I'll hear my wife downstairs saying, "Oh, good Lord." And I will know now, we've done it often enough now, I know that if I go downstairs after a while, I get a cup of coffee and I say, "What was the old good Lord about?" She'll be, "I was trying to watch some show and it just has so much immorality in it." It will be homosexual lovers, it will be unmarried lovers, it will be vile and pitiful language and profanity like crazy. And our kids have TVs in their room, and they watch whatever they want to watch. And if you censor their television somehow, they'll just do it on their iPads or their phones or their computers. It's just amazing. And we've seen all this shift in just one generation. And when my own daughters were young, we didn't want them to become taught by television. I consider TV to be a teacher. I consider TV to be an influencer. And so we didn't want them taught by television. And so we developed rules early on. When you come in from school, the first thing you do is grab a snack if you want it, and then do homework. Homework is done first. And they would pout and cry, oh, we want to go out in the street and play with our friends. Okay, go do your homework first, and then you can go out and play in the street with your friends. No. Their mother would come in and say, well, let them go play. Okay, you can go play for 30 minutes or 40 minutes, but I want the homework done. I don't want you up at midnight trying to cram on homework. Get the homework done. They'd go out, they'd play for an hour, they come back in, they go take a shower, and then they want to watch TV. No, the TV doesn't turn on until the homework is done. Got to get the homework done. You get the homework done, we'll see what's on TV, if there's anything worth watching. And then Sandy, my wife and I, we didn't sit down and turn the TV on and watch it while they're trying to do their homework. We just left it off. It just stayed off because I consider the television a teacher. And so when they got through with homework, we'd turn the television on. There were sometimes we'd turn it off pretty quickly. Sometimes we would watch something all the way through. I will tell you that even in their high school years, we would try to go to a movie at the theater together, and it would embarrass them or you to know what movies we actually got up and just slipped out on, because they're just taken so for granted anymore. But there were movies that are just commonly watched, and people say, did you watch so-and-so, 30 years ago, 40 years? Yeah. Only I didn't, because we would sit there, and when it got to violating the conscience and when it turned immoral, I would just lean over and whisper and say, I'm sorry, girls, but in a minute I'm going to get up and go out, and then y'all, you can wait a few minutes if you want, but follow me out. We're done with this. We're not going to watch this. And so they'd quietly and embarrassingly get up and walk out and follow Daddy out. And we'd go home and get in the car, go get something to eat, go talk about the movie and where it broke down, because I felt like that's what my job was as a parent. My job has never been to make them like me and think I was cool and oh, I love my daddy. He's the best daddy in the neighborhood. That was never my role given to me from God, nor is it yours, dads and moms. It is your role to teach and train a child how they have to live, conduct themselves. Jewish law said, let it be like a frontlet hanging in front of their eyes. They can't even, everywhere they turn, that thing is dangling there to remind them of the law of God. That was my job to do that. And then I'd send them to schools and hope the teachers would reflect our values and our morals. And they did that in my youth. My teachers were always respectful of my parents and always reflected their values. When my kids were in school, once in a while a teacher would just go on a tirade in front of a class here in our school district. And one time one of them went on a tirade and called them all a bunch of vulgar names because they had performed poorly on one of his exams, and he used a lot of profanity that we didn't want them using and did not use in front of them. So I went to the school and asked for a meeting with the principal and sat down with the principal and laid my complaint out on the table. And I said, this is what I'm told was said, and this is what I would like to happen. I don't care what you do to the teacher. I want my child out of his class permanently today. Don't care what time of the year it is. I want my child out of that class. And if you don't want to speak to the teacher, I'll be glad to speak to him and explain to him why. And after the principal let me lay my cards on the table, the principal said, I want to apologize to you because that's not our policy, and I want to give you an assurance. I've already heard from 3 other parents today. I'm sure there'll be others in that same class yesterday who were as offended. And I said, I hope there's more than 3. She would tell me later, the principal would, that there were about a dozen families who called because they were offended by a teacher cussing out a bunch of kids in the 9th grade, of all things. And so it was my duty to go take a stand for moral behavior and proper etiquette. teaching kids that language is not acceptable, that sex before marriage is not acceptable, that if you make a mistake and you do have sex and have a baby, that wasn't acceptable, but now we have a baby and we're going to raise a baby, and life's going to be centered around that, and you're going to absorb the biblical responsibility of a mother. Don't care what your excuses and complaints are. This is what life is all about, and it's the morality that we aim for and live for. And so the failure today with the numbers that we're seeing in abortion tells me not that government's bad. I never trust government. I don't think anybody trusted the Roman government in Christ's days, but it's what they had and they lived with it. And so we have a government that is corrupt, and I'm sure it's corrupt, and God bless a handful of people who I think are trying to make it honest, but it's not. We have entrenched dishonesty into the system completely. We let senators and congressmen build rules for themselves that the rest of us don't have to live for. They don't have to be sued for sexual misconduct. They can just pay out of a slush fund. They can't be sued for insider trading. Tell me that's not corrupt. That's all corrupt. You can't live the way they live, and we've allowed that to go on. But that's government's got nothing to do with abortion. Here's what does have to do with abortion, though, is the church not teaching against immoral behavior, fornication, adultery, homosexuality, perversion of any kind. Premarital sex falls under fornication. Teachers not supporting the Christian principles anymore. So many of our teachers are coming from la-la land, the best I can figure it out, and they're making some of the most irrational and stupid statements on Facebook right here in this town. I've also gone to school administration and complained about a few teachers who were posting things that I considered to be immoral and unwise, and shaping kids in the wrong direction. And fortunately, the school administrators agreed, and they made a teacher get off of social media and stop posting the kind of trash that was being posted on there by a teacher. We've been failing a generation, folks. Since 1973, Roe v. Wade, there was not enough women in the world who were pregnant to want to pass those bills and just use it like birth control. It was primarily touted as we need to be able to let a woman have a safe abortion if her life is in danger. Okay, we got it. Okay, that's what we're going to do. But from that day till this, in just 40 years or so, 50 years, we have literally watched this become a freebie from the government, so that no matter how many ways you got pregnant or how many times you got pregnant, you can go have it taken care of discreetly and with no money out of your pocket, and everything's gone. And the problem with that is, where did we lose our complete sense of moral living and moral choices? And that blame is right there on that screen. The church began to just be interested in television and money and building bigger, prettier buildings and having fancier stuff going on, and clubs and activities. And teachers began to be indoctrinated with their own ideology that it's just everybody's okay no matter what they do and how they live. And parents who just want to be liked and admired, or who don't care about the kids, won't tolerate a struggling marriage. I'm not going to put up with that. I go find me a woman that I can have fun with, or a man that'll treat me right. And these kids are just left somewhere in the middle to fend for themselves. No wonder we have a complete moral collapse in this country. And so I say that to say this: changing laws, that's nice. Go ahead and talk to politicians and vote them. And I'm going to tell you to do that in a minute. But changing laws will not change hearts, and what we need in America is a change of heart. I don't care if the law never changes. What I do wish would happen is that parents, teachers, pastors, churches, and the entertainment industry could go back to a sense of moral behavior and just try to be good. Try to be right, instead of trying to, let's see how dirty we can be and not get taken off the air. Let's see how ugly. Remember when cable was the only place you could really be violent and you could really be sexually dirty? That's why cable TV came along. Network TV has to remain calm, sort of. The rules have completely gone away. But that's not a government issue. That's a moral issue. So let me just walk through a few things that we need. Number one, we need for us Christians to hold politicians and school districts and television networks accountable. Now, I said politics doesn't matter, and it doesn't. When I say hold them accountable, I simply mean this. Did you know that if you don't voice your opinion, nobody knows what your opinion is? Do you know if you don't ever tell your school district that you don't like some of the books being promoted and used by I don't know if you've been paying attention to this, but I watched a couple of videos recently from some friends of mine right here in Texas in a small East Texas school district. They sent a video to me of their school board meeting, and one parent there had brought a book that her third grade child had brought home. And it was recommended reading from a third grade teacher. And when she opened it up to show the pictures, they stopped her and forbade her, told her to close the book up and do not show that. That's inappropriate. And she and everybody else just burst out. It's inappropriate for us to show it here because they weren't on TV camera. People had their cell phones up taking pictures of this meeting. And the school board did not want anybody putting that out. And the parents were like, and the mother showing that was like, I'm showing you what my third grade son was required to bring home and was recommended by his teacher to bring home and read. It had hand-drawn sketches of sexual positions of partners and what have you. And this was a third grade book. The only thing that will get a school's attention is for parents to just get up off the couch and turn off the television and go to the school and with kindness but firmness say, why are we tolerating this in this school? Why do you think it's appropriate to mislead and misguide our children? See, Jesus wasn't kind about this. We don't want to quote Jesus on this, but I'm going to quote him now. Jesus said, if you offend one of these little ones, children, if you offend one of these little ones, it would have been better for you if when you were born, someone tied a stone around your neck and threw you in the sea and drowned you, than for you to have lived long enough to offend one of these kids. An entire world is going to face the judgment and the wrath of God at the end of the church age because they have offended generations of children by propagating immoral, indecent, ungodly lifestyles. So we need to hold them accountable. If you don't have your representatives or senators' email addresses or phone numbers, I keep a folder in the foyer of our church. I wish you would just do one at your home. You can just Google it at home and pull their addresses up, and you can get them. All of them have a .gov address. You can just send them your emails and or call. You don't ever get to talk to them personally. You talk to a staff member. Most time you talk to a recording. But email them. At least you're getting your opinion so they know that you do. The only thing they hear from sometime are activists. They don't get to hear from just Christian parents who are concerned at the direction we're taking our generation, our kids. We need a support system for girls, and we need accountability for boys. Every father needs to be teaching his boys sexual responsibility and proper behavior and respect for a girl. And the way you do that is turn off some of the stupid TV shows. Watch out for some of the games that they play too that have graphic artists defining and designing the perfect bodies for boys to look at. Boys are sight motivated. They're aroused by what they see. We need accountability from dads. The Bible says so, who will train boys to respect girls and not treat them as sex objects. We got so many dads who are still treating girls and women like they're sex objects and can't talk about them, even to their team. I've heard men in the mall who I could tell were that's father or uncle, clearly, too much older, and then wisecracking to the kid walking by him about, whoa, a girl walked by. Did you see that? And then describe her anatomy in some ridiculous manner. We need to support our girls and our boys in moral behavior and choices, and we need to show it in front of them and practice it as well. We need teaching in the home, in the church, and media. This should be number 3. The numbers got mixed up. We need to be teaching at home, and we need to be in the church teaching moral lifestyle, and we need to be holding media. I wish to goodness that the media had a sense of self-governance like they did in my youth. In my youth, they never showed a man and woman woman, even married man and woman, in the bed together on television when I was young watching TV. They just didn't. They might hug each other and kiss each other on the cheek and go into the bedroom door, and then the door would close, and that was it. They didn't show you the graphics of it. But now it's just all. It's just there. It's like no holds barred. It's like the raunchier they can make it, the bigger the audiences are. Why is the audience bigger for raunchiness? Because we've lost our sense of biblical value. We've lost our morality. As we lose our sense of morality, we lose our sanctity of life. You can't treat a woman like a sex object if you believe in the sanctity of life that God has made us in. And so if you believe God has made us, then you respect each other because we're all designed creatures in the image of God, and God owns us and God controls us. Luke, the 1st chapter, verse 17 says, "And he shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elias to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." This is not about Christ. You see up there, I say, we need Christ. This was actually a statement trying to describe John the Baptist going before Christ. And it's actually a quote from an Old Testament prophet who said the same thing, that in those days there would come one who would, and I just underlined the phrase I wanted you to see, how unique that the Bible said, when the time of Christ comes, I'm going to try to make sure I turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children. This is if we need a revival in America and the world, this is the revival we need. We need the hearts of dads, the hearts of moms to be turned back to their offspring. Another verse in Ephesians 6th chapter, verse 4 says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger." Fathers, don't provoke your kids to anger. But, and then the underlined portion, I underlined it so I could pause on it. You see what it says there. What's the instruction to a father? Bring your child up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Not just your discipline, or in this house, this is what you're going to do. And here, my word's the law. You're going to do it my way. Hit the highway. I set the rules. That's your way. This verse doesn't tell you, make sure they obey your rules. This verse says, bring your children up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. Turn to the Scripture and teach your children and motivate them from the Scripture point of view. Always do it from the Scripture point of view. It's not, I want you to do this. It's the Bible teaches us this. This is why we do this. And I remember, I didn't have boys. I don't mind telling you publicly why I probably didn't have boys. I prayed not to have them. I asked God to give me girls. Now, that turns out to have been a great gamble and maybe a little unwise one. In case they're watching, it was the best thing that ever happened. But the reason I didn't want boys is because I genuinely had a latent fear that if I had a son, he would be just like me. And the last thing I wanted any boy to do was the stuff I had done. My dad told me once before he died, just about every gray hair on your mom and me, you put on us. And I thought maybe he was joking, but I knew deep down he really wasn't. And I know why. I look back on it. I was the only child in the family. I had two sisters and a brother born before me, and then I was the last one. And I don't know what it was. I was adventuresome. I liked to do things. I was the first kid to have stitches. I was the first kid to get knocked out at school, cracked on the head. I was the first kid to break a bone. I broke a collarbone. I wrecked a motorcycle. I don't know. I put a car in the ditch, maybe twice. I don't remember. I know I tried to hide one with scrapes all down the family car. I drove the family car when I was in the 8th grade. Stole it, basically. I washed it. My dad was gone. My mom was in the back of the house sewing. I figured I knew how to drive, had never driven the car at all. I 56 Chevrolet automatic transmission. I washed it. I had a girlfriend lived a few blocks up the street. I knew I can back out, get up there, say hello to her at the curb, and get back. Mom will never come out of the room and know that I've been gone, and I did. I backed out. I ran over a few curbs. It was harder than I thought it was. I got in front of her car, ran up on her curb, honked the horn. She came running out. I didn't know you could drive. Oh, I've been driving a long time. I literally said that to her. I've been driving a long time. And then when I said, I got to go, she left. I still hit the curb again and came back out in the street. And that's why they had gray hair. And then I got drafted. Nobody had been in the Army in my family. I got drafted. I went to Vietnam. When I came back from Vietnam, I was gone. They said goodbye to a boy that lived in their house and had a good engineering job, worked for a great company, and was a draftsman and then an artist and illustrator, and making great money. And then got drafted, and I said goodbye to them and left my bedroom and my home and went to Vietnam. And when I came back from Vietnam, I never stayed home. I was gone forever. I came home for about 30 days, long enough to buy a car and get my stuff together, and then I hit the road traveling and never came back and lived with my parents. And so basically they were just suddenly deprived of their son. It was a loss for them. And I didn't want boys. I didn't want a boy to hurt me like I had hurt my parents. I didn't want a boy to put gray hair on me like I did them. I didn't want a boy to get in some of the messes that I had been in life here and there. And I just thought girls are the answer. So I prayed for girls. That's why I got girls. And I will tell you, when my first girl reached dating age, I wish that I'd have had a boy first, just so he could beat up the boy that tried to mess with his sister. Because I knew I'd go to jail if I messed with the boy that messed with my daughters. And it's hard to let my daughter go on her first date, just her and a boy in the car. And so I decided before that day happens, I'm a parent, I must teach. And here's the verse. I got to bring her into the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. Fortunately, they've never told me all their secrets. I hope they don't. And I hope I die not knowing. But I will tell you what I do know. I do know that I took this seriously, and each girl, before she was allowed to go on a date with a boy, each girl was set down in the house, and my wife and I sat at the table, and she talked to her a little while, and then I would say, I'm going to give you a boy's point of view. I'm going to tell you that even a good boy, a good Christian boy, is going to want to see how far you'll let him go with your body. I don't care how good he is and what religion he belongs to and how often he goes to church. When he's alone with you and holding hands or rubbing your side and sitting side by side, he's going to shift gears, and he's going to want to know how far you'll let him go. And he will not say no to himself. It will be your responsibility as the girl to know where to draw the line and say no. And one of them said, that's just so unfair. And I said, I know it's unfair, but you don't know that the little boys out there are going to pick you up and take you. Have not had a daddy sit them down like I'm sitting you down and say, boy, if I ever find out you touch a girl wrong, I'm going to whip you. No, it doesn't matter. Daddies need to have a clear reason and a clear focus why. So I'm going to tell you, you're sanctified. You're made by God. You're made in His image and likeness. You're made with choice and the ability to give choice. And you have the power over your body, and nobody else does. And you want to preserve this sexual thing God has made out of you. You want to preserve it for the man you marry. Don't care what your friends do. Don't care what high school does. Don't care what TV shows you. You only want to care, what does God want out of you, and how would God glorify you and sanctify you? What choices would you have to make for God to say, I'm well pleased in her? That's where you are. And every stinking boy is going to push the edges. And I don't want you to be a prude. I'm not expecting you to be a prude. And I would show them. I said, put your hand down there on your leg. And I said, now, just imagine if I had a marks a lot, I would draw a mark right there. And I will tell you, put that imaginary mark right there on that leg and watch me and tell me if it's going to be true. He's going to slide above that mark. And when he does, you push him back and pat his hand. He's going to slide it, but you push him back and say, we don't do that. We're not going there. You don't have to say, get that off of me. You just say, no. And just draw that imaginary line right there on your thigh and make sure you never let anybody cross that line except the boy you marry. And so it's fun. It was a fun talk. We talked about, and none of them were short. They're like 3 hours, for each girl over 3 years apart. But I'm telling you that this is where we have been breaking down over the years. I don't know if we can bring an entire generation back to morality and godliness, but I know that if we don't try, we can't. I know this, we're always one generation away from a Christ-less age. Judges 2:10 is just one. This verse almost verbatim can be found several places in the history of Israel. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. One generation remembers, a little king comes along and says, what? I just found the law of the book. We hadn't been doing this. We're going to do it. Cracks the whip. All of Israel goes back under the worship of the one true God, and then they have a blessing for 40 years. And then the Bible says, and then another generation arose that did not do what that generation did. And here we are today. 35 million abortions tell me only one thing. With great sympathy and pity for the girls and the boys in our society and our generation, the abortions simply tell me one thing. We are just one generation away from an age that has no morality, no sense of duty to Christ, no biblical guide whatsoever. Moms and dads split, separated, broken, going their separate ways, pursuing their own selfish interest in so many ways. But we don't have to be. We don't have to lose a generation. We are also only one generation away from a generation that could be turned back to Christ, that could literally come back to immorality has failed us. Look what immorality has done. It has brought us a plethora of diseases. It has brought more communicable diseases into us. It has brought more divorce, higher rates of divorce. Even among Christian families, the rate of divorce is equal to that of non-Christian families. We're no different from the world because we've invited the world to come in, and that becomes our model. We pattern our lives after television stars and people who introduce to us sinful lifestyles. I've joked a few times. I say joked. I've just kind of off the cuff, wisecracked. Would you just open the front door to your house some night when your family's sitting around and just invite a couple of prostitutes in and a pimp maybe, some player? Let a player come in with a woman and just get over there on your couch and just make out so y'all can sit and watch in the living room. And of course the idea of that is ludicrous, like, are you out of your mind? Of course we wouldn't. And yet we will sit around in our recliners and turn on that television and watch people make out with each other and have sex with each other and get hot and steamy and bothered with somebody not married to them. And even if they're married, we shouldn't be watching it. But we just continually show that by our acceptance of that, it's okay to just have a sexual generation, and therefore no wonder we need so many abortions. The answer is not a law to punish women, not to take away anybody's ability to just get on with life, do what they want to, even if it includes the murder of a child. That's not our biggest problem. Our biggest problem is we're facing a generation that may not know God at all. We may be looking at a coming generation right in front of us that will fulfill the last days prophecy. When he comes, will he find faith? And for that question to even be in the Bible about the last days, when he comes, shall he find faith? That question ought to frighten all of us. He's got to find it in us, and he's got to find it in our children. He's got to find it in our relationships and our ability to stay through tough times and rocky times and make relationships work rather than break up the family unity and hurt kids and divide and conquer. Somehow, we've got to turn ourselves and then turn the hearts of fathers back to kids, turn the kids back to morality. That's the antidote for America, not another law. Politics is not the answer. senators and presidents is not the answer. Republicans and Democrats don't have the answer. The answer is not to forbid all abortion. I don't care if they have a law that anybody can get an abortion for any time. My concern is, why are there so many, and why do so many just callously want them? And that's where we have broken down as a society. In every strata of church, teaching, parents, entertainment, politics, we have failed this generation in that we have failed to promote moral, godly lifestyles. That's our prayer. That's my prayer today. And I bring this lesson only for you to include it in yours. It's time for us to pray, God, help us turn our hearts back to you, and then turn our children's hearts to you. Help us to turn this generation around. We don't need laws to do that. We need Christ to do that. Bring us back to a Christ-filled and Christ-seeking generation. Thank you for your attention. Would you bow for a moment of prayer, please? Father, we face some bad crises in our world today, but perhaps none of them as bad as the moral one that we're facing right now. We have reached such a state of immorality in the world that we just almost don't even preach against any kind of sin anymore. The word's not even permitted in some things. Some hymns don't even want to use the word sin or the blood of Christ. And here we are, a generation on the verge of going down or up. Please help us be a generation that goes back up toward morality and tries to turn things around for you. Not in laws. It's not about government fixing it. It's about us fixing our churches, fixing our preaching, fixing our families, fixing our teaching. Help us to do that. I ask in Christ's name that you help us. Get it in our hearts to change our generation and point them back to Christ for morality and sanctity. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. Thank you very much for tuning in.